So here we are with another video about causation questions for Unit 4, this time focusing on the reasons for the purges. It's only been asked twice. These are the two questions that have been set. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's bound to come up this year, but you never know. Think about these questions and think about other questions that they might ask you on this same topic. So how to revise: identify all the major reasons and theories. Please don't just use this video. You need to go beyond this video and use your booklet. Make sure you maximize all of that learning that you've been doing this year rather than trying to cut corners now. This is not the stage to be trying to cut corners. So identify all the major reasons or the theories about why the purges took place. Secondly, on a separate list, think about all the main groups of people who were purged. Make sure that you can put these reasons in a rank order and you can make connections between them. For each reason or for each group, explain why it was important, and you need at least 3 key examples per factor. You'll find the reasons in your booklets from around about page 70. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of suggested reasons there, so please make sure that you thoroughly understand that before you get too far through thinking about how to write about this topic in the exam. Broadly speaking though, there are 3 main reasons why the purges took place: traditional arguments, revisionist arguments, and the so-called consensus argument. So make sure you understand each of those 3. Do some thought experiments on the reasons for the purges. So think about, would Stalin have launched the purges without these factors? In other words, try to remove one of these factors and see whether the purges play out in the same way. So would the purges have happened had the 1934 Congress not happened? Or had there been no opposition at the 1934 Congress? I think not. Would the purges have happened if Stalin hadn't felt the need to remove real and potential opponents? Again, I think not. Look at who's being purged from the party. Would Stalin have launched the purges without that massive disruption caused by those economic policies? Well, the disruption caused by the economic policies led to the opposition, so perhaps the purges are ultimately caused by Stalin's economic policies, or ultimately caused by the party's reaction to those economic policies. Would Stalin have launched the purges without his own paranoia? Well, possibly. Possibly that opposition was real and he wasn't being paranoid. Would Stalin have launched the purges without the tradition of authoritarianism in Russia? Yeah, I think he would. Countries without traditions of authoritarianism do turn towards authoritarianism, so there's no requirement that in order to murder your own citizens somebody has to have done it before. There's no rule of precedent on things like that, so I don't think that is necessary. The needs of the Gulag, well, I think they were met by the purges, but I don't think they drove the purges. Power of the NKVD, I think the NKVD enabled him to purge the population, but I think he could probably still have done it with a less powerful NKVD, and arguably the NKVD acquired its massive power during the purges rather than before. Ordinary citizens' willingness to denounce one another, I think that came later. I don't think that drove the purges. I think that spread the purges. It enabled the purges to grow, but it wasn't necessary before the purges. Economic difficulties, I don't know about that. I think the argument there is that Stalin explained away economic difficulties by creating this massive conspiracy against the state. I don't think so. I think Stalin wanted to purge and he was using economic difficulties as his excuse. But think about those things and think about whether the purges would have happened at the same time in the same way without any one of those factors. So for question 1, how would you use a contingency argument? Well, I think you'd probably choose one. You'd choose one thing that you are going to argue is that the purges are contingent on that one thing. So, for example, opposition at the 1934 Congress. Stalin would not have purged the Soviet Union, would not have purged the party if that opposition had not come to a head at the 1934 Congress. I think that's absolutely fine. And so you choose one factor and you say that the reasons or the purges are contingent upon this one factor. There were others which also explain it, which fed the purges, but ultimately it's this one factor. Question 2, the main reason was to remove Stalin's rivals for power. I think, yes, you could say that, but I think you could say that Stalin had had rivals for power since Lenin died, since 1924, and he hadn't been purging people in the same way since 1924. So there must have been something else that prompted the purges. It must have been not just that they were rivals for power, but that by 1934 they were actively seeking to remove him, or they were real alternatives to him by 1934, because he wasn't purging Trotsky or Zinoviev or Bukharin in 1927 or 1928. So what's different about 1934? Alternatively, you might prefer a chronological argument, in which case, in order to do this, you need to have in mind a timeline of the purges, and you need to work back through your list of reasons, and you need to think about when these things were important. So, for example, when was Stalin's own paranoia important? Well, I think Stalin had probably always been paranoid. So why did the purges begin in 1934? Did he suddenly become more paranoid in 1934? Was the power of the NKVD at a peak in 1934 or 1936? Does that explain why the purges began? So think about those things and think about when the purges began and when each of those factors was especially relevant. And finally, think about the categorization arguments. Think about the groups of people who were purged. So the party, the citizens, the armed forces, the NKVD, you might organize it slightly differently. But in each case, why was each group of people purged? And were there different reasons for each group? Why was the party purged first? And why did it spread? Might be a question that you ask yourself. So Stalin's reasons for embarking on the Great Purge, you might say, well, he purged the party for these reasons, he purged the people for a different set of reasons, he purged the armed forces for a third set of reasons, and that might be your essay structure there. Or for question 2, you might say, well, the main reason for the purges was to remove Stalin's rivals for power. That's true, and that explains why he purged the party, and perhaps why he purged the armed forces as well. But it doesn't really explain why he purged the people. So there must be other reasons to explain why he purged the people. I hope that helps.